All right, so let's get started, everyone. It's noon here on a Thursday, and we're just wanted to get everyone together. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining our webinar here. And happy to be here with my friends Domenico Polano from Western Alliance Bank and Keith Gray of the Clearinghouse, who I will introduce shortly. So our topic for today is ISO 20022, and we're trying to take a little different look at things and talk about it as the true innovation enabler it is versus just, do I need to comply and when? And because Finsley's belief is that it's much more than just another back office regulatory project. We are of the opinion that although you as financial institutions and corporates, the standards that were introduced over 17 years ago now do increase interoperability between networks. They do help improve straight-through processing. They make reconciliation easier and reduce repairs, fraud, and cost. And so it has become the rule book for a future of standardized high-value payments. It also introduced an expanded message set, which allows for greater richness of data. And I'm sure our guys will talk about this in a little bit. And so ISO 20022 changes the game of what can be delivered in these messages and what can be built on top of these message structures. This gives banks, vendors, other counterparties an opportunity to nurture new innovative services built on these new schema. The most important benefit of this that we see will be the digitalization of the corporate treasury operations and the way payments move around the world, and giving life to the initiative, not just at the middle and back office, but exploring the potential of the standards at the point of the consumption of the information is vital. So are banks aware of these opportunities? Is the payment ecosystem and its participants, are they innovative and resilient enough to bring to life these new ideas and services? And obviously some people have already done that, so the answer to that question is yes. But before I introduce my colleagues on the panel today, I want to give you a brief overview of ISO 22, just in case you're not that familiar with it. So let's just move to the next slide here. Okay, so what is it? And it's been around for a long time, so hopefully it's not new. ISO 22 was created, and it exists as a standard that was first introduced in 2004, and it focused on an international standard for relaying electronic messages between financial institutions. And after years of suffering some sort of disparate or limited message types across different payment rails, today we look at and still work with the Swift MT message series, which has its own limitations as to the structures and what data can be included in messages and how it's included. It really is encouraging to see coming to fruition this capability of ISO 20022 and its vision for the future. It creates a common language for payment data, which is really critical across networks, whether it be Swift, RTP with the Clearinghouse, Fedwire, and global message standards around the world for different real-time gross settlement systems and real-time payment systems in other parts of the world. And in the correspondent banking space, which is the Swift world for the most part, we're coming up on ISO 20022 compliance in November. So as to the when this all becomes a focus for you guys, is anyone focused on Swift, excuse me, will need to start worrying about ISO 20022 compliance in November 2022 this year. But there is a phase-in period over the next 3 years, and you'll have some different options out there from Swift, from vendors like Finsley, from networks like the Clearinghouse, as to how you go about adopting these standards, and depending on the message types and the type of payments you're dealing with, what's going to happen. Domestic payments here in the US, the anticipation is that between Fedwire and CHIPS, the expected introduction to is also November this year. But remembering that the RTP was built in 2017 on ISO 20022, and the Fed has promised that the FedNow instant payment network that they are introducing would also be ISO 20022 compliant. So You might notice here I mentioned Europe. Europe is a bit ahead of us, and that's okay. They've been doing this a little bit longer in terms of real-time payments, and I think that's what encouraged them. They also have also been a little bit ahead in the SWIFT components of things. So I wanted to give you this picture of the journey. I found this from a company called Accelerate Next, and it's a good representation of what people will anticipate the migration to ISO 20022 to look like. And, starting in November 2022, like I mentioned, all financial institutions are starting to require that, or will be required to start processing. Okay. So as I'm giving you this look at this picture, I want to introduce our panelists and get to hear some of their expertise. And so first, I want Gray. He's vice president with the Clearinghouse, with responsibility for strategic partnerships. These partnerships have been and are critical to the success of RTP and the Clearinghouse in general, and that many banks and credit unions will leverage real-time payments through a trusted technology partner. Keith works with these partners to facilitate launching and supporting their payment initiatives, as well as support banks and credit unions directly as they plan to execute their strategies to leverage real-time payments in other networks. And during his 20-year career, Keith has worked extensively with financial institutions of all sizes, as well as financial technology companies on emerging payment initiatives, mobile solutions, and online banking applications. And he's worked with multiple early-stage organizations bringing new products to market. He speaks a lot, I know for certain, because he's spoken with me a couple of times at conferences and payments-related functions, and he's an alumnus of Tribeca University in Nashville, and something I kind of expected but didn't know for sure. Keith is a big golfer and fly fisherman. So welcome, Keith, and I'm going to get you a question in a second, so let you say hi.
Thanks for including us on the webinar here.
Thanks, Keith. And now my friend Domenico Polano has a degree from the University of Toronto in mathematics and applied statistics, which means he and I haven't spoken nearly enough to know about his past. He began his banking career in Toronto in 1988 with Banca Commerciale Italiana Intesa Bank in Canada, and worked there until 2001. And he was the senior manager of operations and central processing there, with stints in accounting, market risk management, and project management. That eventually brought him to California and Arizona in 2006, where he began a tenure with Silicon Valley Bank as foreign exchange operations senior manager, in tandem with stints as wire ops manager, business analyst, global treasury manager, and IT business liaison manager. And knowing that time, and Domenico, you and I have to catch up on the side on this, that was a period of massive growth at Silicon Valley Bank from 2006 until when you left and went to Western Alliance Bank, where we met in 2017. And Domenico's been with Western Alliance Bank in Phoenix as international payments manager and head of the foreign exchange middle office since 2017. He's a father of 11-year-old twins and a scratch golfer in spare time. So now I realize that between Keith and Domenico, I have at least 2 players for my annual golf outing to participate on my team. So just to get you guys chatting, I wanted to start out with ask some questions, especially given your experience with RTP and the Clearinghouse, the member banks, the banks that have joined on. Obviously, RTP was built on the original ISO 20022 standard. How have you seen that benefit customers of the real-time payments rail, both the banks and the businesses it serves?
Yeah, so and you've definitely touched on a number of the benefits that we thought were very important as we were planning RTP. I think I would say, and I've been at the Clearinghouse for about 7 years now, so I've been involved with RTP before there was such a thing as RTP, frankly, and I would say because of the the direction that a number of other countries around the world were moving, and how ISO 20022 had evolved as a standard, or was evolving, I would say, at that time as a standard. I would say that was definitely a big motivator for us to leverage the ISO 20022 spec as well. In addition to that, there's all of the capabilities it provides. We had to think about things like bandwidth and a lot of the technical speed type of SLAs that we supporting the SLAs that we knew were going to be needed in a real-time environment. So just the technical capabilities of ISO. We also knew very importantly was going to be the capability of moving not only the payment but the data associated with the payment as well, and ISO is just great at that. And the way I like to talk about it is it's a bigger pipe than we're used to from an industry standpoint, right? So
right.
A lot of the use cases that are live now with RTP are taking advantage of not only the payment and the speed of payment, or immediate or almost immediate, but also the data associated with it as well. And all of that leads, really pointed us to the ISO spec very quickly. And frankly, we've never had a moment's regret that that's the direction we went with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Keith. And it's just interesting to see that it's a great standard. It's been around for a long time, but it's still, we're still pushing people to adopt it. And I know Domenico has his battles to bear, with his own bank as to preparation. So Domenico, maybe you can share how Western Alliance Bank and how you have gotten yourself prepared for what we know is coming in November, and who you rely on to gain understanding of what needs to change. Hey, Dom, there you go. Perfect.
I was on mute. Apologies for that. Thanks for the opportunity, by the way, Brian. Appreciate this.
Oh, pleasure.
Yeah. So it's funny that we've been talking about this standard for seems like a decade or more.
Exactly.
It's finally coming to fruition. I remember going to Swift webinar in Pasadena, like in, I want to say 2010 or 2011, maybe sooner. And they had started introducing this, but it's good and bad that it's taken this long, but it's finally coming to fruition. I think all of us in the industry are wanting to get this over with, I think.
Yeah.
But since for the past year or so, I've been working with our vendors, yourselves, with Swift directly. I've been attending a lot of their webinars to get as much information as possible. I've been reading up on Swift.com, that sort of thing. And I've also inquired with our correspondents, which are some of the major large banks around the world, and getting information from them. But particularly, and then more urgently, I think I've been working with our service bureau provider. And finding out how they are preparing, and we are about to kick off the project in the next few weeks with them to ensure that they will be prepared, and that we will be in a position, hopefully in the next month or so, to start testing once our UAT system is upgraded.
Right.
And I can't emphasize that enough, that it's most importantly that November is not too far off, and that certainly get your vendors aware if they're not already. I'm sure they are, but get in contact with them and ensure that they are preparing as you would like. I'm also partnering with our internal project and IT teams to ensure that they are getting prepared for ISO in general, not just from a payments perspective, but also from a core perspective, and from a client front end system. I think, the clients in particular, as well as our back office teams, will need some education as to what is an ISO format. Some of us have been in this business, as you mentioned in my bio. I've been dealing with Swift since '89 or '90,
Exactly.
and so used to MT format, messages, that you can do them in your sleep.
Yeah.
But when I look at an MX formatted message, kind of look at it like you're staring at some alien,
some foreign language, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's best to start getting prepared and educate your back office teams and your clients, and to make them aware of what's going to happen and what may be required from your front end systems as to what required and mandatory fields are going to be necessary for their payments going international.
That's a great point, Domenico. I know that just a quick follow up there. And so, I mean, having dealt with so many banks in my past, what's always a hesitation, I think, of any wire operations team is, hey, I know my formats. I know FedWire, I know Swift, and the MT formats, and how am I going to understand this new language, and how am I going to get there? And I suspect there's not a lot of people jumping up and down saying, yay, bring me this new message format.
Yeah, exactly. No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, it's crazy. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for that, Domenico. So, so just going back to Keith then for a moment. So I know that the clearinghouse has been thinking about this for a long time, and you guys have been working with ISO 20022, but what has the clearinghouse done to address what a future that includes interoperability, either whether it's, interoperability with cross-border regimes, or even domestically with other real-time payment networks?
So, I mean, obviously, the big topic of discussion here in the U.S. Around interoperability is about interoperability with the FedNow platform whenever that launches.
Right.
From a technical standpoint, there are advantages to them being obviously ISO 20022. The message specs are different. Obviously in a perfect world, it would operate, like our ACH network EPN does with Fed ACH, right? You can send an ACH transaction to either network, and it ends up on the appropriate network on the receiving end. The two networks fully interoperate, right? We know that's not going to be possible in a real-time environment. I think there will be some level of interoperability. The Fed chose not to go with our specific message specs. They have their own. They have their own business rules that makes things a little different. I think the level of interoperability that is achieved whenever they, and it won't be whenever they launch, because that's going to be a very limited functional spec. But as it moves forward, I think it's going to rely on companies like Finsley to provide some type of a routing mechanism in the middle. So the fact that both networks are ISO 22, the fact that CHIPS is moving to ISO, and Swift and all the others, I think that shortens the development time frame. I use the example of, there's French, and then there's Canadian French. I mean, if you know one, it helps to know the other, even though it's not exactly right. So I think it's this. I think it's a good analogy, and I think it definitely shortcuts the development process moving forward. Although it's not the end all be all either. There's going to be a good bit of work in the middle of those two.
Yeah, it's interesting, just thinking from our perspective on our platform, when you're into a system that processes all the different payment rails, and you're looking at the underlying message structure, whether it be Swift or RTP or FedWire or whatever comes down the road with FedNow, if we're looking and presenting to the operators and to the bankers this common view, although it'll be slightly different, as you mentioned, Keith, then people's expertise hopefully will develop more quickly, and they're not just looking at Swift in a vacuum, or RTP in a vacuum, or FedNow in a vacuum, or even FedWire next year in a vacuum. They're looking at it as, oh wow, these are ISO20022 standard messages. The way they're populated, the business rules around them might be slightly different, but the hopefully it'll bring about a quick education across them and make it easier. Cool. All right, so wanted to give a chance to Domenico again to talk a little bit about, in your traveling through these Swift educational webinars and the industry, have you found, even inside the bank, have you found people just having certain things about what this transition is and why ISO 20022 may or may not be beneficial to the bank in the long term?
Yes. I think that it's the enriched data and added fields will certainly have a great effect on payments and the banking industry. Because of we've already had other markets. You mentioned Europe that have started, and I just corresponded with our partners in Singapore, for example, that are ready to go live within their own domestic payment system coming up in June. You think I think, as I said, that these fields that are going to be added in this enriched data are gonna have some good effects, in the sense that hopefully, as a back office manager in the past, and current back office managers will find that hopefully when we receive this enriched data for our clients who are receiving payments, for example, they will have more information about what the payment is for, of course, purpose of payment and so forth. And the inquiries into back offices and our client-facing teams will hopefully be reduced, because that information will be there available to them. And that is only if, as we've mentioned previously, banks and FIs are able to upgrade and enhance their core system, and to be able to report this data that's available for messages back to the clients through reporting and or statements. The other thing I would also mention too is that if and when we banks receive the MX and ISO formatted messages, because of that enriched and greater data that's available there, it's very important to acknowledge that those MX messages will have to be sanction screened versus the translated MT message that Swift is going to provide as an embedded file within that original MX message.
That's a great point. That's because of the greater amount of information there, right?
Exactly. And obviously you'd want to be able to scan that entire message and not a truncated file in the form of the MT, because he obviously might miss something that's important to scan that may be caught and on the sanctions list.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to make sure that that is mentioned.
That's a great point, and I want to, and that was a little bit of surprise for me to think about right now, but I want to pose it to Keith too, in that vendors like Finsley and others who provide OFAC screening solutions for these banks, when you go in there and you give them this enriched message, especially for those banks that today are already sending and receiving RTP messages, Keith, what have you heard from them as to, in terms of real-time OFAC screen or OFAC screening within a real-time world, and even fraud detection in an OFAC in a real-time world.
Yeah. So as it relates to RTP, we don't just in general, we don't try to dictate how a bank handles, OFAC as an example, right? We just
right.
You need to handle it. And RTP right now is domestic only transactions. So typically, what we're seeing is banks are handling RTP transactions very similar to the way they're handling ACH transactions.
Oh, ACHs. Okay, got it.
Domestic ACH transactions as well, and wires here locally, here domestic. So the ISO 20022 message, again, it's all about the benefit of the standard, right? So and the technology, and the vast majority of banks lean on technology providers like Finley for services like that, right? So it's up to the technology providers in many cases to make sure that they're adopting, and by and large, I'm definitely seeing companies like Finley having a big leg up in that area for sure.
Thanks, Keith. No, and Domenico too. I think that puts the challenge to us and to other vendors like us who provide both OFAC screening and fraud detection. Not so much fraud detection from a Finley perspective, but other vendors that we know of and work with. That if you're in a real-time regime and you're doing high-value payments and they are cross-border, then those operational tasks need to be robust. They need to include everything they see in that new message format that expand message and data, and it needs to be scanned, and it needs to be done right away, and someone needs to touch it right away. Otherwise, it's not going to go out as quickly as it should. Great point. Cool. So one of the things I wanted to also pose to Keith too is that since ISO 20022 has been around a long time, and you guys are kind of at the forefront with real-time payments and using this schema to bring it to the world. A lot we kind of see, and we're hoping that people take the new compliance dates as a way to innovate, take advantage of this stuff, and not just comply. But what do you guys see? And I can imagine your member banks, being some of the larger banks too, they would be thinking ahead, and they're doing their own education of their own customers on this stuff. What are the leaps that the market needs to take to get better adoption, other than just saying we have to comply?
I think, and it's a combination of, the large banks have technical teams that have been all over this for a long time now. As you said, ISO 20022 isn't new per se, but our functional implementation of it in many cases here in the U.S. it's a new thing. RTP is over 4 years old now, and it was definitely on the forefront. Now you're seeing a lot of the other networks, wire networks, FedWire, chips, et cetera, kind of moving in that direction as well. And I hear all the time from technology partners that we deal with, well, how come you guys are doing it this way or not moving faster in this area or that area? Well, in the banking industry, the price of failure is huge, right? I mean, we move at the clearinghouse, we move $2.5 trillion every day, and changing the model, it takes a lot of planning and testing and execution to make sure that we and our customers don't end up on the cover of the Wall Street Journal.
Exactly. Right? Sending a real-time payment to some weird actor in Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ukraine these days, right?
Or Ukraine, exactly.
So anyway, no, but it's a building tide, I think, in the vendor community and the banking community, and it's not happening overnight, and it probably shouldn't. But it's definitely the direction we're all going. Domenico hit on it. The value of that payment traveling with the data associated with it is huge as it applies to downstream use cases. And you get the infrastructure in place to support it when companies like Finley, and then you have a whole new capability if your infrastructure provides certain functionality, it allows that functionality to feed up into a host of different use cases. And we're seeing that with not only RTP, but just in general, ISO-based networks around the world.
Keith, you had mentioned too to me that you guys had done a kind of a pilot program across border, correct? I wanted to give you an opportunity to mention that.
Yeah, we did that a little bit under the radar late last year, I would say. But, we've said, I mentioned RTP is domestic payments right now.
Right.
But what I tell people is that from the long time ago, I've been saying this is a business decision, not a technical limitation. Well, we wanted to prove that. We wanted to prove that. So we partnered with Swift and EBA Clearing in the UK, and we validated that one RTP, one ISO-based network can send payments in real time to another ISO-based network via Swift and EBA Clearing. So we had about 10 banks involved, and those other two networks, and frankly, it went flawlessly. So
I'm sure.
So when the industry is ready to move to true real-time cross-border payments, we know we'll be ready for it and are ready for it, and ISO is what makes that possible, frankly. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And frankly, I think it'll happen sooner rather than later. I think the value of real-time payments here domestically is growing by leaps and bounds. Cases, right, and that very quickly will move into the international framework as well.
Yeah, just in my 3 years here at Fensley, it's that building of momentum has really changed dramatically. So hopefully that continues. And so Domenico, one question I was trying to dig, and what I mean by dig is I know the details of an MT message. And then I tried to say to myself, what if I was sitting in Domenico's shoes or any number of our customers dealing with Swift messaging, because Fensley creates Swift messages, that we're not a Swift service bureau, but we create them, we receive them, we process them. I was looking to see, what are these differences and what are the most significant between that MT message and that new ISO20022 message that Swift is going to expect. Or the MX series, however we want to rephrase it, right? So just basic, something around like, say, field 72, right? Where we packed information in the MT message today. What messages worry you the most? Like which actually, like you sit there, the MT message, it's got to translate into something. What's going to cause the most problem?
Well, I think that, the most basic of MT messages and the one that is, used, the customer credit transfer of MT103, that has been the one that obviously is used a lot to make the cross-border transfers between corporates. Just the field, the amount of data that is going to be available, as you mentioned, field 72 is not likely to be available in ISO. It's going to be, because of the added data fields, yes. All of the field 72 will not really be necessary anymore. Right. Because of the the expansion of, let's say, purpose of payment, which will have literally thousands and thousands of characters available to it, whereas today it's just 4 lines of 35 characters.
Right.
Address field is another one where again, right now what's available is again 4 lines of 35 characters, but in ISO, that's broken down into many different fields. Right. And just recently we came across a regulation in Canada where they're going to, begin scrutinizing whether the addresses are complete and whether they contain the country code, for example, within it, or the country name within it, that it's going to, whether we're sending payments into Canada or through Canada to, even though it's in Canadian dollars, might be going to a different market.
Right.
So, you know, we had this issue where some of our clients were putting CA, for example, for California, whereas
Right.
CA is the international standard for the country of Canada.
Right.
So there's confusion, but that would be alleviated within the ISO standard because of the country code field, which will be mandatory, and that
Right.
has to be a particular 2-digit code.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one, you know, so that's really the concern. I mean, there's other things that are concerning to me, regarding, you know, the message follow-up and inquiries and that sort of thing. It seems a lot more involved, even though we've, you know, we had this GPI initiative that got off the ground a year or two ago, and has kind of made things, has settled down a little bit. People are getting, banks, I should say, are getting accustomed to it. And I think the responses that are going to are just a little bit more involved and a little bit more, I guess.
I'm just thinking more complicated than you might think.
I was going to say convoluted, but that's
Right.
that's kind of
Right.
you know, that's because of our not being used to those standards yet in those formats. But
Right.
I think it's just a matter of you know, your teams starting to get used to those message types and understanding, you know, what is, you know, an MT199, which is another response standard that is used, you know,
Right.
by everyone. There are different types of now 199s that are equivalents in ISO format. So it's going to be a little different, and something we're going to have to educate ourselves on.
That's great. No, thank you, Domenico. That's awesome. So just to, you know, what I think we can do, we're getting close to wrap up time here. I wanted to quickly share, just remind people of what, you know, what we're thinking the benefits are of ISO, and give you guys a chance to have some last words before we go. So let me just, 1 second. All right, so here are the things that, you know, the market has told us, and, you know, what we kind of believe there, where there's areas of benefit from the ISO 20022 standards and the availability and compliance efforts that your banks and other institutions will have to make, vendors, ourselves. But it provides that interoperability we talked about. It enables a greater transmission of richer payment data. And we might see it as different, obviously, as it moves from MT to in Swift to a richer format. There's going to be a learning curve as to what information sits where and how it can be compliant with the correspondent banks that are out there processing the larger number of transactions. It helps for straight through processing because obviously the message types are a little richer and should be more easily recognized, and hopefully helps for more efficient compliant processes like we talked about with OFAC screening and with fraud detection, in that you have earlier and more robust information as you're going through the screening processes. And then when it comes to bank servicing corporates, I think there's some real opportunity. Finsley itself is part of what's called the Business Payments Coalition, as well as the U.S. Faster Payments Council here. I know that Keith and their clearinghouses are very much involved in those organizations. And so what I think the opportunity lenders like Finsley, and for bankers like Domenico, will have this ability to start offering corporations new services, whether it be, you know, invoicing and e-invoice exchange, or the ability to execute on behalf of payments out of a central treasury or in-house bank situation with certain treasurers. So there's going to be some great opportunities. And so before we go, I just wanted to give, Keith and Domenico the last word here. Keith, in terms of if you were going to tell your banking friends, what should they be making sure that they look at in the next few months in terms of ISO 20022, whether it's in relation to chips or FedWire or RTP or Swift. What do you think you could say?
Yeah, so I would say, and this is typically my message across the industry, is step one is being able to receive the volume that's on the network now. So phase one, get on the RTP network. The vast majority of banks on the network, there's over 200 now, the vast majority of banks that are on the network come through a technology provider. Third-party service providers like Finsley can make it very easy to turn on the receive capability of RTP. So you have multiple technology choices. I would say is explore what works for you. Choose a vendor, go direct, whatever. You want to enable your customers to receive the volume that's on the network now. But what we're really excited about as well moving forward this year, and Brian, you hit the nail on the head with the impact of the ISO 20022 capabilities around e-invoicing. We're really excited about the launch of some requests for payment-based bill pay capabilities this year, where it really enables the straight-through processing capabilities from business to business or small business to consumer type of capabilities, where I can present you an invoice. You can make the decision, do you want to pay it now or not? Do you want to set a payment at midnight tonight if that's when it's due? But really it enables that straight-through processing capability. And you're going to see a lot of stuff in the industry press where financial institutions and their technology providers have some really exciting things going in that area, which is just going to ramp up and continue to drive additional volume and additional value add services beyond the payment that's happening now on the network. And the base of that, you've got to have the plumbing is the ISO 22 message text, which enable a host of application development on top of it. So it's exciting.
Yeah, that is really exciting. Yeah, I'm excited to see those things work out. I know our roadmap includes a lot of it too. So so we'll see what comes out with it. And then Domenico, I know for you and our colleagues in the regional banking space here in the US, what advice would you have for them and for your peers as to what's critical over the next few months? And you mentioned some of it earlier, but I want to give you a chance to expand on it.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's easy to make ourselves believe that Swift and our vendors and our partners have it all under control for us, and isn't this why we utilize and pay them for their products and services, right?
Yeah.
But, I think although Swift is providing this this transition period, they're providing this translation or transaction manager to convert MT to MX and vice versa. I think it's really important to get in contact with your relationship manager at Swift, with your relationship manager if that's with your service bureau or Swift gateway provider. Make sure that they are getting prepared for what's coming up in November. Obviously, with any of your back office vendors, this is just the first step, but I think it's an important one. And to ensure that the messages that you and your clients rely on in payments are going to continue to flow with as much straight-through processing as you're used to today, and ensure that, as we mentioned, that your compliance teams are ready for the new standards. Your compliance vendors are ready for the new standards. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to start testing. I think Swift, I know Swift is providing a service for its members to sign up for testing opportunities with Swift. And reach out to your correspondents find out which of them will be sending MX ISO formatted messages after November 2022.
Right.
I think, again, just get educated and ensure that your teams get used to that format and familiarize themselves with those fields and formats.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Domenico, and thanks to both of you again for being here today, and really appreciate your time and expertise. Looks like we're come up on our 45-minute mark, so appreciate everyone in the attendee audience for joining, and thanks for being part of our webinar. We will have this recorded, and Keith and Domenico, I'll share with you, as well as with the greater audience. We'll put it up on our website for you guys to review in the future. And thanks so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
You as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Take care.